So, and it's full spectrum management, consulting. I have multiple phase approach to what I'm doing, some implementation work. I have done some implementation work myself, but generally speaking, I'm just kind of in the consulting phase, come on-site visits, recommendations, give you a kind of portfolio plan. That's kind of my forte, but that's a little bit about me and my company.
Yeah. And how long have you been doing that, John?
Well, 6 years I've been doing it professionally. I've been doing it for three. Um, I started my first habitat project probably 15 years ago. I was in my 20s. I was an outdoor writer for 15, 16 years. I'm gonna kind of retire that probably this year. And I love doing this. I love meeting people. I learn a lot. It's nice to be part of this group here. Ben, it's nice to be with him. So I'm just kind of happy to be a part of this, and thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man. And I think you mentioned, but Central New York, south of Syracuse. So
Yeah, I live in the hotbed of the best hunting in New York State, Syracuse, New York. Okay, but I will say this is, well, maybe we can get into this tonight. I like low deer numbers. I think it makes it a lot easier to hunt, and there's a lot of benefit to that. So, don't look at some of these areas as just because we're not producing Boone and Crockett deer as being poor areas for hunting. You got to think relative, and I'd like to say that there's guys around me that aren't shooting 150s and 160s, although there are, and I've seen that. And you can shoot big bucks, but we got to all think it's not always about antlers, and that's kind of here what we're to focus on and talk about, right? Because you guys got some problems, and we're going to give you some answers, hopefully.
hopefully. So thank you, John. Glad to have you. And again, appreciate your support. And everybody go over and check John out. I'm sure you'll enjoy what he has to say tonight. And last but not least, Ben Williams with Ol'Tin Cup. Ben, why don't you introduce yourself? Same deal. Where you're located, how long you've been doing this, how you got into it, and anything else you want to add there.
Yeah, so Ben Williams, I run Ol'Tin Cup Habitat Restoration and Enhancement. Also, I'm a licensed real estate agent at Future Forest Properties, specializing in recreational land, timberland, that sort of thing. I've been doing the consulting now for, I think this will be my 7th year doing it, under a DBA or whatnot. And I just enjoy doing it. It's not, I don't pull a lot of client numbers every year, but I'd like to think quality over quantity kind of thing. So I do work full-time job. I do real estate. I do the consulting. I do contract work too. I'm pretty busy, but yeah, I'm really happy to get on with John. I know we have a lot of like kind of differing opinions on it, which is really cool. I like bouncing different ideas off of different people, and I think you get a lot more out of it. So I'm just looking forward to the conversation, and support your local NDA branch, and get involved. And I think there's going to be some of that in the conversation tonight too.
Yeah, sure. It's almost like I set you up for that. So before we dive right into tonight's discussion, I want to announce a contest we're going to be doing that we'll be rolling out tomorrow, the 12th of February. We are going to be doing we're calling it the first annual Pertnear Outdoors Shed Fest. And what we're going to do is we're going to basically run a contest through the end of April, and we'll have the application to enter into the contest will be open until April 1st. So anybody out there who's already found some sheds or find sheds throughout that time, it's fine. It's kind of an honor system deal. If you participated in our turkey contest back in the spring, a lot of the same idea. We're just hoping that everybody is honest and truthful. But we're going to have 3 different categories. We got some great prizes. We're going to have the best match set, and we will judge that based on our own scale, which I will post up when we post up the contest. But we're going to have the best match set. And Jon Teater, he's donating a crossbow. Jon has done some writing in the past and does testing of products, and crossbow being one of them. So Jon will be donating a crossbow for that first prize, which is an awesome value for that. And then we will have best single side, which will be NDA is donating the Deer Steward 1 class, which is a $200 value. It's a class put on by Clemson University or through Clemson University online. So that's an awesome deal there. And then the third prize will be the best deadhead, and that will be a trail cam package from Pertnear Outdoors, which is Brad Sisson's business. It's a website where you can purchase trail cams and things like that. So we're going to be doing it. It's a $30 entry. We'll have it up on the website, on our website, pertnearoutdoors.com tomorrow. And you can start by placing your order. And with that, you will get a t-shirt. We've got a t-shirt designed up that Russ over at Whitetail Company designed for us. So we'll be doing a t-shirt. So for $30, you're going to get a t-shirt, and you're going to get a 1-year membership to the National Deer Association, which is a screaming deal. And really excited to be partnering up with National Deer Association to help grow their membership, and also get people involved and out in the field this spring to find some sheds and enjoy walking in knee-deep snow. So should be a good time. So keep your eyes peeled. We'll be posting up about that quite a bit here in the coming days. So before we get right into it, Jim, we got any hot, important things we need to address from the message board, or just people picking on me? You're muted. Let's move on. Okay. Dead air is not good for live audiences, Jim. All right. We're going to share my screen here. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we talked about, we wanted to jump into looking at our farm and our situation to kind of get the conversation going here tonight. So the plan is we'll talk about our farm, and then I posted up on social the last couple of days and got a bunch of good questions from folks. So we'll be answering those questions as well as anything else that pops up throughout the discussion. But I'm going to kind of pass this over to Dallas and kind of give the rundown on the farm, since he grew up on the farm and it's been in his family for multiple generations. He knows more history about it than I do, but we kind of wanted to share our situation and what we're dealing with, because I think it's very relatable. I've heard quite a bit of talk on different podcasts over the last couple months about similar discussions and challenges that we're facing. So thought it might be good to use our property as an example here. And Dallas, I'll let you run with her.
Okay. Well, I think the key thing that you said there is that it's pretty relatable. Our property is, in the middle of Dairyland, essentially in Western New York. And I think a lot of the people, pretty much everyone in the area, I think, has had similar experience to us, where they own or live on or hunt on a piece of property that is either an active farm or was a farm. And in our case, it was a dairy farm that we ran for a very long time in our family, 2 generations. And then it turned into a crop farm. And now the tillable is being run by another farmer, but it is still being farmed. But the fact is that it's an old dairy farm. And the way that dairy farms change over the years has influenced this property, probably, in a similar way that most people are dealing with. So, one major thing that changed was that, back through from forever ago until, probably like the mid to late 90s, everyone had their dairy cows out in pastures. So a lot of the farm was cow pasture. That practice pretty much ended on our farm in the late 90s, and in a lot of others the same way. So a lot of that old pasture ground grew up into, native grasses, invasives. Some of them turned into, some of the pastures, if it was possible, they were turned into crop fields. Others were too wet or too hard to access. Usually every pasture has streams running down through it. So it kind of turns into a brushy, sort of what a lot of people refer to as CRP. But that with that comes unknowns, because you don't know really what that's going to turn into. So I don't know, I guess it's always been a good deer hunting property, ours in particular, if you want to just get into talking about that. But over the years, it's changed so much. And I guess one of the things is it's amazing how fast it changes. Like you go into the woods from a couple of years difference, and you've seen the aerials from back in the day, before you were around, Billy, but things change so fast and you don't really know or understand how that's going to affect the deer habitat. And like I said, in a lot of ways, it's been a good property over the years. But it seems to get more and more challenging almost every season, both to try to manage it and to really just keep up with what's going on.
Yeah. So, and I made some points here just to hit on, we transitioned from dairy to cash crop. Your dad and my father-in-law, they sold the cows in 2010, 2008 range, whatever. And that really changed the property then, as you stopped having the pastures. So the woods started to really grow because you didn't have a lot of browsing going on from the cattle. And then, so the woods have matured. We've had changes in hedgerows, which massive changes in this past year with the new folks coming in that are farming the land. They took out two and a half like significant hedgerows that were travel corridors where the deer were moving, and there was always scrapes and rubs along those edges. Did not see that this year. So we've seen that change, and as I mentioned here, it's a recent sale of property kind of changes your ability to control some of those things. So it's forced us to step back a little bit and take a look at things. And the last couple seasons, the historic, the lure of the property, that there was always going to be a big buck or two or three hanging around, that just didn't seem to be the case this year. And a lot of things that we kind of, after the season was over, stepped back and looked at is that the way that the crops are being handled around us is different. There's more corn that was being chopped instead of being combined. So there wasn't much left for the deer. And we had always in the past had standing corn. We did not have any this year in food plots. We didn't do that. So there was just like little things like that were different and changed. So just to kind of lay out some of the groundwork of why we are taking a step back and looking at things. So anything else to add there, Dallas?
Yeah, I think we should talk about deer hunting goals too. And I think this is another common thread here too, is that, we always were very happy with the deer we were killing on this farm, because for years we were shooting 2-year-olds and we were targeting 2 and 3-year-olds, and we'd be happy to kill an older deer. But now we're targeting older deer and we're passing on all the 2 and a lot of the 3-year-olds. And so I think in a lot of cases, and I think a lot of other people are the same way, whereas you're kind of looking at your results at the end of the year and you're saying, well, I didn't kill any 4-year-old bucks, but now it's because you're targeting 4-year-old bucks too.
That's true.
So when your goals change on a property without, you have to do other things to change, to help feed those goals. So one thing is obviously passing on younger bucks, but that alone won't get you to just killing older bucks. So you have to have a property and a habitat that'll support holding those older mature deer on your property so that you have the opportunity to hunt them. There's a disconnect there, I think.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, which has got some pictures that we can look at. We're all rednecks here and we're all picture folk. How can I move this out of the way? Move that right there. So on, you guys can see these pictures, right? Is that a Roger?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So on the left, we have a picture from 1995. And on the right, we got a picture from the winter of 2017. So as we're sitting here looking at this, the area that we're really paying attention to is going to be this area down here. This is an area, actually, it includes this. This is what we call the bushes. It's a swamp. It was always kind of goldenrod good bedding area in here. And even back 10 years ago when I was hunting here for the first time, this area was not, it was not as thick as it is over here. So this was an area that deer were constantly bedding and filing out this way and filing out this way to the fields to eat at night. And then this area here is another area of attention that we're looking at, for this discussion here, where you can see over on this side, this area has filled in quite significantly with trees and bushes and shrubs, as well as over here, this area, especially this front half, was very open. There's probably 8 to 12 like good size apple trees up in this front area right here, like a little orchard, that is very overgrown. The trees were getting choked out, and they were kind of struggling to really produce well over the last several years. So that's kind of setting the table for the discussion here on something that we're working on actively right now on the farm this winter going through. So I guess that kind of starts into the conversation with Ben and Jon. You guys wanted to tear apart what we're working on or give us pointers there. So all the things that we just have talked about and laid out, I guess starting with you, Ben, kind of what are you seeing? What are your thoughts in looking at this?
First and foremost, boils right down to access. Before we're talking any improvements, any areas to work on anything like that, the first thing I'm going to do is try to flesh out your access. You did share the point with me, so I did pull it up on Onyx, and looks like you can access from 1 or 2 different roads at least for this piece too.
Yeah, most of our access is from the north, and we can access from the west, but now this hedgerow here is gone, so this is all wide open fields, so that it's very you are butt naked, and with the wind, the normal wind out of the west at your back blowing into the property. So
right. Basically with that big approach, I see that a lot kind of in our region of the Finger Lakes. It's kind of ag dairy country for majority of the area working until you get down in the southern tier. But a lot of those areas, people look at me like I'm crazy and they think they're missing their primetime locations. I'll tell them to walk across that field during daylight, rather than trying to blow everything out of that field first thing in the morning. If that is your only access, I'd rather be coming in half hour after legal shooting, slipping in, back behind some cover there, and getting into a stand location, trying to get them filtering back through, like you said, maybe that apple little grove area that you have there, before they go back to a different bedding area that mid-morning kind of time, or get on a cruising line and set up for a nice buck when it comes down to, pre-rut time. But I would definitely look at the access, trying to pull up the map at the same time and look at the screens that you got. So there's actually a fair amount that I could see with the topography, with the way it kind of lays through there, coming in more on the east side of it, rather than northwest and shooting yourself in the foot, because you got, like you said, and you get a lot of the northwest, we get a lot of the northwest, but the real consistent winds are going to be those southwest, those souths, are going to be the ones that are consistent throughout the day. So that's the ones that I'm going to really focus on. Yeah, right around where you're kind of coming down with the cursor, almost accessing like that, and then coming in perpendicular, into access on that.
Yeah. So you bring up a good point, which I think I guess we got to point this out to you guys in looking at this, is that the travel patterns of the deer, they seem to go back and forth like this. This is how they kind of move. They use the hardwoods a little bit, but it's a lot of back and forth. They do a lot of bedding over in here and back in here. And historically we're bedding a lot in here, but since this has grown up and developed and opened up in the understory, there's not a lot of bedding going on over here. So Danny Boy has actually hunts over in here, and he has access in from the east here. So we would love to just primarily come in over here and blow out all of this deer, so he would have no opportunity at all. But yeah, so I think that's important to point out to you guys, to Ben and Jon, and anybody who's watching, is like, when we're looking at this is the travel pattern is typically kind of east and west across the property here is what we're seeing. Some north and south. Would you agree, Dallas? Or
yeah, just because more of the cover is on the east, And we do generally access from the east. And I would say too, that we don't hunt very many mornings because because no matter where you come in from, you're coming through crop fields and you have a tendency to bump a lot of deer in the morning. So unless it's the rut or maybe like, pretty much rut time, I'll hunt in the morning, but I will use the strategy at times, like you said, of coming in after daylight or right at gray light, trying to avoid chasing more deer than I need to. But for me, it's more of an afternoon hunting spot just because of the access.
Right.
Yeah, I want to see John's kind of take on it and see what he sees with the initial look. There's another thing too that I saw when I pulled it up on Onyx with kind of the way the topography rolls through there. That lends really a lot to that kind of the way that travel is across there because of the way that topography kind of rolls and has a little bits of slope on, I guess it would be, I think it's the north side of it. And then kind of like into that easterly side kind of goes down through there. That lends right to it. So I'll let John kind of take over and see what his first reactions are to it.
So, I grew up hunting block timber, and I really do love hunting this type of, situation because now I'm hunting, 100% wood lots. So this allows you to neck down the deer. Um, Ben had all great points, nothing really to add there. Obviously, early season, the south winds are usually pretty critical. The way I look at it is contours really dictate travel patterns. You have a small swell or a high knoll. Those usually tend to predict where deer want to end up. So, and I don't have your contour map on, but anybody's looking at their property, start to look at the contour map in relationship to the aerial map. It kind of has been said. And then, from a movement and access standpoint, I mean, that's critical. That kind of shapes, your situation from how you access the property. What I like to do with clients is, what does your data really reveal? Time of day usage is, that historical information is completely relevant. Deer tend to do the same things over and over and over again until they're drastically disturbed with a habitat change or some type of disturbance, some type of disruption. And usually we're the disruptors, right? The human is disrupting the environment. So in a natural setting, you have to ask yourself, what are the deer doing naturally? Now, what I like to do is I like to segment a property like that into these small little chunks, right? Because as one individual or just a few individuals, working on the property, you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. Having really two good sets of cover points on a property like that, and when I say, size wise, it could be 2 to 5 acres of dense cover. Now, let's forget what the species of cover is, but just cover in general. Accessing a point in between those is critical. And then there's all these different philosophies that are out there, and I hear inside out properties, outside in properties. We're trying to create deer flow and movement and access in a point that's perpendicular, right? So we don't necessarily want to get inside those points of interest, those focal points that deer want to be in. So if you're thinking about it holistically, forget the map for a second. That's kind of your general approach to doing anything. And we're thinking offensively, right? We are trying to kill that deer on a specific day in a specific location. Really taking the historical data and playing it out, I think, adds to what Ben said. You started throwing in, there's apple trees here. There's destination food, or there's food that may be harvested and not of interest. We got a farm here that I worked on 4 years ago, and they went from no cover crops after harvest to 100% cover crops. And it's a huge farm. It's over 1,000-acre farm. And the interest point on that farm has gone up exponentially, just by that little bit of change. And so for like a landowner or even somebody in a leasee, if you said to your farmer after he was taking off his corn crop, I want to put down 80, 90, 100 pounds of winter rye, those are things that you can do that aren't really expensive, that he's probably not going to complain about because you're actually helping him. So, and you're talking about the hedgerows being dismantled, right? We're trying to save that top layer of soil, and there's been statistics done, and this is important consideration, you know, a penny's width or a nickel's width of soil over an acre is around 5,000 tons of topsoil lost if that's blown away. So, you know, I'm not getting to the specific question of how do you hunt this property, but thinking about some of the issues just off the bat. I want really defined bedding areas in specific locations that you can easily access. And I want those points of interest to be points that have historically been points of interest. So I hope that helps.
For sure. It does help. And I think that, I don't know about you, Dallas, but then bringing up the point of the contour lines, you know, I just pulled that up and kind of looking at that, there is some identifiable travel patterns that go along with those contour points.
You know,
You're lazy.
one other thing you brought up, and I think it's really important is, you know, you see in the one map there, there's swamp, right? Swamp it's usually pretty fertile ground. Swamp is one of, you know, the least amount or the least prevalent vegetation types or habitat types for deer across the state, right? That to me is a huge benefit to a hunting property. There's a lot of isolation associated with wetland areas or swampy areas. You know, if you're looking to buy a property, you know, those are things that I would focus in on. And you got a gold mine there. Now, your distances in relationship to how you access that are kind of, I don't want to say screwy, but I'm questioning kind of what you guys are doing here. At least if you got to come along that line, it's a tough call, right? You want to get in there and hunt, but when do you hunt? You know, the gray light situation or Ben just after hours, I think that makes a ton of sense. So, you know, you've got a gold mine in that little area there.
Yeah.
Just looking at that section.
The swamp.
Yeah, I love swamps. Love them.
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about the swamp. Basically, back, you know, 20, 30 years ago, when there was very little cover on this whole block, that swamp was a gold mine. Because it was thick, it was isolated, it was hard to access. So deer would flock to there, mature bucks would flock to there during the gun season, especially as soon as they got pressured, they would go right up in there. There's good thermal cover in there. There's a lot of cedar and other conifer in there. But now it seems that there's enough cover around, enough bedding that they tend not to use that. They definitely don't move through there on a regular basis. They skirt the edges and they what we refer to as the bushes on the north side is historically where they wanted to spend most of their time, where it was a little drier and there was more feed in there. That swamp, you'll find some bedding around the edges, and we know they do bed in there some, but it's not a place that really gets a lot of deer activity, believe it or not.
No, and I will, you know, John, something you brought up about like how we approach it and how we hunt it. We are very, and I've learned a lot from Brian and Dallas and Bob about how to hunt situations like this, because you know, your nature wants you to just get right back in here when you're getting trail cam pictures of all kinds of bucks and deer out here. This has always been a food plot since I've been with these guys. And the deer just pour out into here at night, and your nature is to want to get back up in here, but we don't, as a rule, we stay in the front half of the property hunting this front edge early in the season and around the edges. And sometime we have property over on the north side of the road too, staying away from those prime areas and just hunting the edges early, and then working further in as it gets closer to the end of October, beginning of November, catching those, you know, bucks moving during daylight. But we really are very, very cognizant of the wind and hunting especially this outside edge. So that leads us to kind of what we're working on right now. And I've got the comparison images up here. One of the areas that we're focusing a lot on right now, over the last couple of years, this food plot has become a huge focal point for us and been dumping a lot of energy and time into putting corn, soybeans. Dallas planted some buckwheat in here in the spring and overseeded it with, I think, was it radishes or some sort of brassica mix?
Yeah.
And we had some soybeans back in here too. But we've spent so much time focusing our energy back here on food, and the deer are spending their time back here but a lot of it's happening after dark now with them not bedding as close to the food. With this area, we're surmising that this area has developed and grown up so much with ash, honeysuckle, buckthorn, to name, probably the 3 most prevalent species in there right now. And it's changed a lot. So we've kind of thought a little bit about, especially with these hedgerows being removed and with the change of how the farm is being farmed, that we want to try to draw the deer more out to the north side of the property so we have better access. The deer are more drawn to food that we plant up here, and focus more on creating good bedding habitat in the back to try to keep the deer either on our property or closer to our property so we can hunt them instead of them just coming there at night from wherever it is that they're bedding during the day. So I think that it kind of moves us into the next part of the discussion, looking at what we're actively working on right now and in our situation. So right now, anybody who's been following along, you've seen we've been working this winter, cutting and trying to thin out some things. And this is where we want to get into the nitty gritty with Ben and Jon about some best practices on ways to, during the winter here, especially capitalize on this cold weather, snow on the ground. It's a good time to be out there with a chainsaw, taking care of some of these issues. So we're spending a lot of time focusing on this portion right here that I highlighted earlier, and a little bit over here in this area, generally trying to get rid of buckthorn, honeysuckle, and some ash that is actually standing dead or dying from the emerald ash borer. So I think the first question is, how do you handle buckthorn and honeysuckle? Those are 2 that have really taken us quickly in a lot of these areas. So I guess, Ben, start with you, how you approach situations like that.
So with any invasive, and in a lot of cases old pasture ground especially, it's really tough, and they do take over and completely in a lot of areas. So it can be very difficult, especially pasture ground is very notorious for it. And it shades out a lot of stuff that you would see in a non-invasive type habitat and pasture reclamation, or whatever you want to refer to it as, is stuff like hawthorn and dogwood and some good, native regenerative stuff in there. It just outcompetes it. And then that stuff that the deer aren't eating, the deer are going to eat your hawthorn and your dogwood and that kind of stuff. So you're not going to get a lot of that good regeneration in there. And shoot, ash trees, you cut that thing down 19 million times and the thing's going to probably resprout. The only thing that kills it is the ash borer, it seems. But so it's, and I approach it kind of like Jon referred to, of a piece of property, knocking it out in sections, and not going through and eliminating it all necessarily in an area either. It's going to be a multi-year process. It's going to be probably something you work on the rest of your life in a lot of places. My property is one of them included, where I'm going to be battling honeysuckle, hogweed, bittersweet. I mean, you name it. I go right down the list of probably the big 5 or 6 invasives in New York. I got them, and I just got to work with them and live with them in pieces and chunks. And if you remove a lot of that, that might be the only cover in that section. It's not high quality and it's not great, but if you can, get rid of it in sections of an area, let's just say over a half acre, you take out 50-60% of the honeysuckle, you still have some structure component there. But if you do a good control, stump treatments, whatever it might be for your control method, ripping it out, excavator, tractor, bulldozer, whatever your equipment uses are and stuff too, that's where you're going to get the most bang for it. Going in and just leveling an area, you just set the clock back 30 years. And, are you going to see the benefits of doing that? In some cases you can, if you got a bigger property and you can afford that acreage in that way. But a lot of it is, I see a lot of people going and completely clear it out, and they've ruined all that cover that they had. It was growing up in there. It wasn't great cover, but it was some cover component. So mixing in control into those areas, I think, is a great place to start with it. Especially when, like you said, it kind of runs rampant in those old pasture grounds.
Yeah,
Treatment. Go ahead, Jon.
No, Ben nailed that. And one point that I think is really critical that he hit on is the fact that, that shrubby component, buckthorn specifically is browsed pretty heavily by deer at a certain stage in its life cycle. And, you could you could look at it a couple ways. You could cut it and it could resprout, right? It's going to compete with whatever else is, native in the seed bank or adjacent to it. It could be a source of food, at least temporarily. It'll get browsed out depending on your deer pressure and interest. That's assumed that there's no other plant life that, that would be attracted in that particular area. So, you can remove it. And like Ben said, I mean, it does not become a aspect of cover. And, statistical, I've read a few articles, scientific articles, just about, like, in our specific region, the time to replenish those areas of cover. And you're looking probably at a minimum of 7 to 10 years. I'm not talking about dozers. I'm talking about just cutting an area and replacing it with something of similar composition, at least, size, stature wise. So if you did bulldoze an area, I mean, Ben said 30, and that's probably, it could be that long. So that's when you start making these changes. You start asking yourself, what would be the net benefit of such a change? But I do have a couple other strategies for buckthorn because I deal with it quite a bit. But yeah, sorry, I cut you off.
No, let's hear them. That's what I wanted to. We're going to talk buckthorn, and then you and I had a discussion earlier this week that I think moves into looking at this exact piece here. Am I muted?
No.
I'm not muted. Okay.
No, you're fine.
I was muted for a second. So yeah, what are some of your management practices on buckthorn? I in the treatment, talk treatment, because Ben hit on that, but I'm guessing that your guys are going to be in the same line there. Seeing a lot about spraying these and how quickly do you need to spray them if you truly want to kill them. Can you go over that?
Well, let me throw out a different strategy to spraying, right? No foliar sprays. Let's say you're opposed to that just because, some people are. And I think one strategy, this is applicable to the common buckthorn. Okay, common buckthorn, there's male and female plants. Now you can pick, but it's easy to identify male and female plants. Females are typically going to have the berries. They will have the berries. Those kind of black purplish berries that you see, you can see them this time of year pretty well. A lot of times they're dropping off the trees, birds are eating them, distributing across your property, just whoop-de-doo, right? Those particular females or males, you can get rid of one or the other. And you can mark those this time of year and cut them. That would be one situation with again, that's common buckthorn. That's a European variety. So there's glossy buckthorn, which those are almost self-fertile. Look at them as self-fertile. Now, if those are on your property, that is a situation where you're going to do a foliar spray or basil cut, or you're going to cover the ground and they're going to be a source of food for some time. So those are pretty much, I guess those are pretty much the options that I would recommend. What have I typically sprayed on buckthorn? Garlon 4A. I've sprayed that in the wintertime. I've killed them glyphosate, dicambria. I've killed them with that. There's a variety of, you can pick it up Tractor Supply. There's a brush killer variety that you can use. I think it's a Gordon's or a Tordon. Actually, I think it's Gordon's. They have an ultimate brush killer. That stuff is probably, it's got trichlor in it. It's got 2,4-D. And I can't think offhand. I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but that kills. That literally is a major suppressor. I mean, you can basil bark spray, you can stump cut spray, you can foliar spray that stuff. I mean, that stuff is bad news.
Yeah.
So I jumped in front of Ben, but that stuff would be a good option. So Ben, you've probably got other things that you use. That's just one option I can think of.
Yeah, I for a lot of my buckthorn, for a majority of it, I cut it. Like you said, the browse is not very high quality, but there's quality there. Whether it's some kind of food value. If it's up 15 foot tall and then buckthorn, I mean, there's no value there. And if you cut it, flush cut it at the stump, I wouldn't recommend hinge cutting it necessarily. I don't want a wall of buckthorn usually, but usually I'm not really doing much treatment of it not doing much foliar spray on it either. Foliar spray is something that I would attack more with honeysuckle when I'm knocking out pocketed areas in a solid honeysuckle thicket or something like that. But if I'm in a buckthorn area, usually I'll find a place where I can maybe I'll get an ash tree down in an area first and then start, felling some buckthorn in there to start opening up some, some pockets and that kind of stuff. But a lot of times I'm not doing a lot of chemical stuff. I try to save the chemicals mostly for the food plots, if at all possible. Like you said, there's a lot of good options with just, stump cutting them and letting them regen and, and getting the browse value out of them, because there is good browse value there on any kind of real stump resprout. And they do stump resprout very well, for sure.
Yeah, that concept of mineral stumps that, they've talked about for the past 5 years, you think about that as there's a flush growth that results after you cut them. And, they're the first plant to really green up. We'll get to bush honeysuckle, but you see these invasives, and that's really the easy way to identify invasive most of the time. You may not know exactly what it is, but usually they green up a lot earlier than every other bush or shrub, or and that's how you point them out. And you may not even know what the plant is, but that's a good indicator. And a lot of times it kind of shows its non-native status within the woodlots. So think of it kind of in that aspect. But yeah, I think it provides a ton of browse value to that point. And another strategy that I've been using is grapevine is completely I want to say, it's native, but it's completely invasive. It's an invasive native. So I've been in situations where I've not killed grapevine, kept the buckthorn, and allowed the grapevine to create pockets of overhead cover over the buckthorn, killing the buckthorn, but creating structure. So that's a way to create some kind of false canopy. And here's the benefit of that. You're saving yourself work down the road, because that buckthorn is pretty rigid. It stays standing for a long period of time. And what it'll do, and you can see it dead on the side of the road. That's how you can kind of tell it lasts a long time. If it stays alive or dead on the side of the road, you can tell it's pretty rigorous. It eliminates, the sun penetrating to the ground, and that creates no work for you. You don't have to clear out a spot for a deer to lay per se. You can use it as a backhoe for cover, and it looks just like that. It looks like a backstop at a baseball diamond. That's kind of that look. And that's again working with a native plant to defeat a non-native plant to give you structure. And you see that quite a bit. That's a good strategy.
Dallas, anything?
Yeah, you guys are the first ones I've actually heard talk about deer browsing on buckthorn. That's interesting, because I think that's why. So if you look at this east-west rectangular piece here that we're kind of talking about, yeah. So before Billy hunted there, so like the late 90s, early 2000s, there was about a 10-year period there where you could sit on the north end of that and watch out over that, and deer would be moving east to west all day long. Daylight, 24 hours, they'd be moving back and forth east and west through there and browsing. And a lot of what they were browsing on, looking back at it, was that young buckthorn. So when that stuff turned from cow pasture into habitat, about 10 years after that was when the buckthorn was all growing up to being like hip height. So it was in the deer's browse line. So I think that, and me and Dad thought that's what they were browsing on, but then the more we looked into it, everyone will tell you that they don't really eat that stuff, but that's what they were doing, was browsing on that buckthorn during the day. And it was nice low cover for them where they felt secure and they had to browse. And back then was a lot of that was before we even had good food plots back there. Like that 3 acre rectangular field was just hay. It was just old grass there. They would eat in it, but it wasn't an attractive food source. But yet the deer were in there all day long. They bedded there, they bred there, they browsed there. It was a great place. And that's long since been the case. And it's always befuddled me, because when I go back there, it looks like awesome habitat, because you can't see very far. It's thick. There's, even though it's a lot of it's honeysuckle and buckthorn and stuff that's not necessarily attractive, it looks like great cover. You'd think there'd be deer bedded all over back there, but they're just not anymore. And I think one of the reasons is probably they were browsing on all that stuff back when it was young, but now it's too mature to the point where they don't like it anymore.
Yep.
To one point there, and we were talking about the swamp earlier, and just connecting on that point is a lot of times honeysuckle is like prevalent and buckthorn's prevalent on a property like this. It creates so much inaccessibility to the deer. They can't even get in there. You can't even get in there. And you got to recognize travel patterns. What I like about swamps is if you're creating a travel corridor into a swamp, I want it super narrow, because audibly, I think the deer feel a safety factor when they come in and out of those areas. And they certainly can tell audibly a human accessing those areas versus a deer accessing those areas. That creates a very good sanctuary aspect of that. But if they can't really even access that point, it makes it pretty much unusable space. And that's kind of what you're trying to mitigate. And frankly, if I'm talking flow, if you can get these deer leveraging those wet areas, assuming there's a dry component to the wet areas coming into this field, but then being segregated in the field, that may benefit you. And frankly, clearing out those areas up on the top part of the head of that particular area there may not provide any interest. It may require that buffer zone you need to access that swing gate area in between those two fields. So I'm not saying don't cut that area, but I might be hesitant to cut that area. I might want to leave that as a dead zone, and then propagate parts of that field, visually segregating it, and lining the exterior with switchgrass, 10, 12 feet. Don't edge feather in certain areas like that. That creates an interest point, particularly up by your access points. So, I'm not suggesting that that's the decision you should make, but that's one thing you could do. And just solid trails. I mean, most of the clients I go to, they can't tell me where the deer trails are. Now, when I go out to Western New York, the deer population is exponentially different in some of these areas. I was in the Catskills just recently, and the volume of deer were nothing compared to other areas I've been in. And you could define a particular deer trail. Think offensively and make the deer do what you want to do. So many people tell me, I can't get deer to do what I want them to do. I don't have that problem. They're going to naturally want something. You got to be able to relate to what they need, but you can definitely dictate their interest points. You may have to amplify that habitat for their particular needs and purpose, but you can certainly make changes. I mean, somebody says, I can't get a deer to bed here. I can. And my tactics aren't, rocket science or anything like you've never heard before. It's picking the right location and structuring in a way where there's going to be a lot of interest point. So I don't mean to monetize this discussion, but I think you might consider creating a buffer space between you and the deer. And sometimes invasive species allow you to do that. And that can be a good thing and a bad thing.
Is it possible to uncut stuff you've cut?
No. Time.
We'll glue it back together.
Slick Willie likes to use the chainsaw. I'm the hinge cutting kid. Yep. All right. We are, I don't want to just keep focused on this because we are getting some great questions. So this is a live Q&A. So I guess the whole message here to everybody is we are working on a lot of the same things that other people are. And I'm sure there'll be much more conversation to come with Jon and Ben about the stuff here. I've got more questions from this, but we could be here all night covering those. So I do want to kind of dive into some of the questions that are getting thrown at us. So Jimbo,
hey, Billy.
Yeah. You
should let Ben hit on bush honeysuckle, because that,
okay.
Just real quick.
Hammer it, feed it.
All right. Hammering real quick. Going to be super blunt with this. You guys gone easy. And what I mean by that is I'm not trying to be, I'm a straightforward, straight shooter. I think that food plot is doing you a lot more harm than good. And you're already kind of painting that picture for yourselves that you're kind of almost shooting yourself in the foot, putting your cover right adjacent to your only food source, which is right next to one of your main, if your only access point with it. So I would almost reduce the size of that food plot and concentrate more of that habitat effort deeper into that piece of property And then, like John said, pick away and use that as a buffer zone. You know, just because you got open ground, and believe me, I love planting every acre of open ground I could put a plot on, but it might be that I break that into, you know, 2 plots, you know, and cut down like a big middle section of that, you know, rectangle field and use it for different, you know, field types and stuff like that. Yeah, break it up, make it into different cover crop rotations of, you know, some cool season annuals, and then, you know, some stuff like maybe some clovers on the other side, couple year rotation, flip them on and off, you know, with certain blends in with that. And like I said, I would almost concentrate deeper into the property, because you have to have that huntability to it. Otherwise you're almost, you know, being counterproductive with it. So, and like John said, with the honeysuckle stuff, I love knocking in pockets. You know, 2,4-T Glide mix, you know, is usually pretty effective foliar. Pretty good results like June. I don't like getting into spraying in July and August, because when that plant gets stressed, it doesn't take in those chemicals as good. So I like it when it's, you know, not, obviously you can't spray right around the rain, but I like knocking in little pockets into those honeysuckle if I can. Mini excavators work really nice for knocking in little pockets if you have accessibility for one of them, or rent one for a reasonable amount. And just knock a trail through some of that stuff. And the deer are going to go, like we kind of touched on already. Deer are very lazy, very much creatures of habit, very, very consistent, patternable animals. As long as you're not putting more pressure on it, and being counterproductive to what you're trying to accomplish. So with that, I mean, we can, you know, keep touching on it a little bit, but like you said, there are some good questions rolling in too.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to blast you guys on it, but I've been kind of biting my tongue, and John started to go and kind of pick at the edge of it. And I'm like, I just gotta just get it out. But
I'm offended. We're going to end this discussion right here.
This is an interesting food plot pattern you have here, by the way. It looks
That was
interesting.
that was one of our comments, is how'd you guys come up with the shape of that food plot?
There was probably a lot of bush light involved, I'm guessing.
I don't know if it was like a layout over a topo map or
No,
You know, I've read a lot of books, and I've never seen this pattern come up specifically.
It's called the donger is what we call that. The donger.
yeah. So the big rectangular field there, that's and that was actually an ag field. So all we did was turn that into a food plot. The other strip that goes up on an angle up through there, that was one that we created by when things started growing up and we stopped seeing that good movement back there. That was, I don't know, that's just something we came up with for adding some more food back there. But the original big piece there was actually an ag field, but it was wet and it was tough to access. It wasn't high value ag. So Dad just turned that into a food plot. And the thing is, you know, up until last year, we had access to 6-row corn planter, zone tiller, soybeans, corn. You know, Dad was planting 1,000 acres of beans and corn. So it was nothing for him to just come in and drill in 3 acres of corn, and we didn't have to do any work. So it was like, yeah, I planted the corn. So, I mean, it was great for us, you know, but now we don't have that option anymore. And we've already decided that these food plots back are coming out. We're going to keep a little bit of food back there, probably just for, I want to keep a little something up at the north end just to have trail cameras on in the summer to take inventory and whatnot. But for the most part, yeah, that's all coming out. There's going to be trees in there. Interestingly, you mentioned feathering the switchgrass all the way around the outside. That's already in the plans. We're going to just try to grow that up into, we're, like you say, instead of having deer have to move across the wide open there, just let them travel across some cover there. So that's already something that we're planning to do this year.
I'll give you one rule for highly pressured deer, and these are things that probably, you know, Ben and I both know about, but consultants that come out here don't know about. Okay, and this is one of these points where I want everyone to be clear on something. Visual aspect is a huge component of designing these properties, meaning the distance that a deer can see or distance that you can see, and how you buffer those distances is critical. When you're designing food, on my property, I had a 3-acre field. That was the only aspect of open area on my property. I shrunk that down. I don't like large open areas. I do not want deer seeing long distances. This is not for necessarily travel patterns or anything like that. It's just intended to compartmentalize deer and make them feel a small safety space. And a lot of people don't think about that. And that's kind of how you build bedding areas too. So winding trails, but visual limitations is really critical. And there's specific distances that I can, typically, use as a threshold marker, but having movement, steering trails, I mean, those type of things, they work really well. A lot of that stuff is kind of originated out of the Michigan areas where they feel they're the lifeblood of this stuff, but the pressure that's in this state is more significant than Michigan. So I'm always interested when we have other consultants come out here and provide recommendations. And that's one of them that are critical. Limiting visual aspect, but giving it enough, opportunity where the deer feel some aspect of safety. In particular, right now, predation levels are at peak. So I'll just let everyone know, when you're designing your property for the winter time, you providing visual aspect to it is critical. And their bedding patterns completely change, not just from a food structure standpoint, but how they physically relate themselves to incoming predators. So positioning visually and physically, perpendicular or sometimes directly in line so they can see those predators coming. That's what you're seeing right now. You lose a lot of deer to storms. So when storms hit, I think about deer dying. That's just, a weird kind of thing that goes on with me. That all relates kind of to how you design a property, because as the seasons change, the visual aspect changes. So always having buffer zones. And by the way, one last thing I want to add to that aspect, there's a lot of free food out there. I talked on the podcast with you guys, free food plots, natural food plots. You can disc. I'm not suggesting burning, but you could burn. I'm not saying you could burn in this state, but you could burn. You could provide a lot of free resource to the deer. And I'm not always focused on food plots when I'm designing a property. That's actually the last element of it. And I think a lot of people want to do it because it's a pretty thing to do. Big, long food plots, those don't work for me. And those don't work in the state unless you got a really large parcel and you're not really designing it for that specificity where you've got I'm a 50-acre guy. Ben, I think you're 100 acres, or I don't know your size of property, but you're not a big landowner. A lot of these people don't have a huge. I have 5 acres behind my house, and we're killing deer on 5 acres. Okay, so that just goes to show you can design 5 acres to be functional, where you can kill deer every year. We kill deer every year right here in my backyard. All right, we're going to hunt them in the kids' playground this year. We're going to set up in the kids' playground and shoot. I'm going to video it.
Nice.
Just because, yeah, I mean, really, you can do a lot with a little parcel. So.
Well, this kind of dovetails nicely into our first question here, coming from Uncle Rick Milne, the mayor. He has many names. Rick has got a question. Wants to hear kind of thoughts on a piece of property that isn't solely a hunting property, that is something that gets used all year round, family, a lot of activity. So how do you kind of blend, and how do you best handle that when you're going to have a lot of human foot traffic throughout the year, but you also, when it comes to October, November, December, you want to be able to deer hunt that? Couple ideas from you guys on how to approach that.
I mean, I can jump right on that. The way I approach it is very, very few pieces are just solely hunting pieces of clients that I work with. And I'm probably sure John is the same. A lot of people like to bird watch, hike, that kind of stuff throughout their property. And why only limit yourself to only a couple months a year of usage for the taxes that we pay here in New York? It's ridiculous. But, with that year-round traffic thing, we just, start to dial back maybe a little bit with some of our impactfulness. Leading up to season, going into September timeframe, maybe we'll dialing it back a bit. But summertime, it's fair rain. We're running 4-wheelers, we're hiking, taking the dogs for walks, all that stuff like that. And I've said it for years, and that's something I probably picked up from my dad over the years. But the deer are a completely different animal once they go hard antler. Before that, they could care less if you walk right by them. Big, giant bucks and stuff like that, walking right by them out walking with the dogs, and they just don't give a bat an eye at you. So I think that you shouldn't sacrifice, some of your recreational enjoyment just for the sake of hunting a piece of property. I think some people get a little over carried away with it, but at the same time, I don't want somebody riding a 4-wheeler through on November 3rd when I'm out there. So I don't know. That's kind of my take on it. I say use your ground as much as you can and use like a 1-month buffer. It kind of works for us. And And then turkey season wise, we're pretty much out of the woods too. So we're not disrupting that nesting time of the year. So that's kind of our rule of thumb. So
I'll give you my little take on that. I would say put so much time and effort into your property, enjoying it during the off season, that you overload it with usage. You know, I'm so busy right now going to client properties. I don't have time to do this, but I have like a huge project coming up my own property. So if you guys want to help me, I could use a hand. You know, here's the deal. Use your property as much as you can. Use it as often as you can. Improve it as much as you can. But there becomes a point where it hurts you. And you need to figure that inflection point. Whatever that ends up being, that's a personal decision. Some people, you know, they want to check trail cameras all the time. You know, that to me detracts from the opportunity. I don't check trail cameras during the season unless it's an easy access thing. I already know when I'm going to kill my deer. Like today, right now, I know where I'm going to kill my deer this year. I already know. You know, I'm not saying that's going to actually happen, but I'm saying, you know, don't waste your time, you know, during the season. I've got 30 cameras sitting here on the floor. That's about 150,000 pictures I got to go through, right? I'm dreading going through that, but I saved them. I saved them to get that intel for the next year, and use the intel from this past year to help you next year, and use that before you make your habitat improvements. But use your damn property. It's crazy that people spend the taxes they do and they can't use their property, but like dial it down, you know, and don't go in there checking trail cameras all the time. I'm being blunt about that. That's, cellular cameras work or instinctual, hunt instinctual, freestyle hunt. That's the way I still hunt. Go after the deer without intel like that. And, usually if you know your property pretty well, you can attack and kill deer. So,
I think I'll touch on that a little bit too, because our property, I think, is a lot like Rick's. And I think one of the things you got to consider too is who else is hunting there. A lot of the places that families own, there's several people hunting there. The majority of the time that people are hunting there is on the weekend. Everybody's there together. Like where we hunt, to get on top of the hill and hunt, you're not hiking it. I mean, you're taking a four-wheeler. So essentially you're driving right through our property to go to the top of the hill to the other property to hunt. And yeah, you can walk it, but like we've said, you use your property all summer, spring, fall, summer. You're up there cutting wood in the winter. The animals are used to you. They're used to four-wheelers. Driving through, I think what they start to do is I think they start to pattern you. And I think it really shows during deer season when everybody pulls in on Friday or Saturday morning, and then they hear the four-wheelers fire up before sunup, and then you're driving through the woods. And I think they kind of start to figure you out that way. And what I started doing a few years ago was I started taking like Thursday, Friday off. So everybody would leave Sunday. Next thing you know, everybody's comfortable again by Wednesday. And I had deer all over the property at noon, and not even on perfect conditions, but they don't think anybody is there. So, you can sneak into those pieces during season when deer think they have you patterned, and strike when you know the time is right. I mean, you got all the trail cam data. You kind of know when the days are that things happen. So if you can kind of prime your time to get in there and get things done in the middle of the week when somebody's not there, and go put your feet up and drink beer and look at your buck hanging on the pole on the weekend when everybody else shows up.
Great point, Jimbo. All right, on to the next one. And we do have a pile of questions that we got. Well, we probably got 8 or 10 questions that we got before this. And right now we're just handling the questions that have come in live here. So we may have to wrangle you guys up again to do another Q&A if we don't get to those, because people are going to turn into pumpkins here at some point. So Don Lucas has got the next question. He says he manages a 30-acre piece of timber on a hillside in the southern tier that lacks habitat diversity. I can and am introducing small clearings for browse and food. Is there any advantage to intentionally adding bedding cover, and how would it best be accomplished / hunted?
So just real quick, guys that are on here, if you go to the chat, you can see these questions written out. So if you need to look back and reference while somebody else is talking, you can check it out quick.
Yeah, in Zoom, they're in there. Yep. So I don't know
Um,
if one
yeah, I
of
can.
one of you two wants to jump on that one.
It's up to you, John. I mean, if you want to tackle that, or I can.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So I've been to Don's piece, and it really is boiling back to small clearings, and breaking up that, because it's a monoculture woods. It doesn't really have any definitive benches, anything like that. It is primarily a hillsided piece of property. So it is something that you're going to define that movement based around the structure that you create with those pockets of different cover by eliminating some of the tree species, and they cut, some for firewood, everything like that. And just building that around, bona fide, good, accessible stand locations, is the big thing with that. Going in and planting stuff, I think it's going to be pretty hard and counterproductive without taking a large amount of the canopy, just because, like I said, I got a little bit of advantage because I've been down there to that piece of property that I'm pretty sure he's talking about. So I think that was the best fit for that piece, is having, the pockets there based around the stand locations we outlined, and then building the pockets around that, just because there's no other structure there. There's no topo, there's no, anything else defining it. It literally is hillside. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, I've done a lot of hillside properties, and I just did one recently, and like Ben says, you kind of the cutting and the structure, the remaining, the residual material, that kind of dictates interest points, and then use that to pinch or move deer. Offensively, you're manipulating the habitat, and then obviously, you also need to look at the soil aspect of that, right? Because introducing or expecting regeneration, depending on the size of the cuts. Usually cuts are shaped, if you can, giving more southerly exposure to increase regeneration, because a lot of people want quick returns on things. So, the fertility of the soil also plays into that aspect of it. So just take a look at your soil composition and use that as a basis to kind of gauge, based on your cutting, where you want to cut and what your expected results were. It sets expectations, because it's hard to regenerate in some of these areas. Strategies on regeneration are a big aspect of what I'm doing. I'm not a forester, I'm not a professional forester, but I do look out for the benefit of the woodlot, and that biodiversity aspect of it, of having various rich species in abundance in certain areas, again, depending on the fertility, will really add to the interest. And like I said, I don't think you should plant food plots all the time. People just want to plant food plots. They want to be on a tractor. I could have saved so many clients thousands of dollars by suggesting not to buy that $30,000 or $40,000 tractor. Now I've made the mistake myself, so I can relate to anybody who's done that. But you don't need to spend your money on planting trees. It's just a funner hobby. It's just a much better hobby.
So I kind of want to bounce this off of Ben and John real quick on this topic. So a 30-acre piece can be fairly small, and I don't know what he's got on either side of it. But I hunted a smaller piece growing up that had field front, field back, woods in the center. It was probably about a 30-acre piece, and it was fairly narrow, and the deer crossed through it like crazy. And what they did was they kind of hung, there was kind of a thicket line through the middle of the property along a creek, and they really hung that. So my question to you would be, on a smaller piece like that, a 30-acre piece, if he's seeing natural deer movement, through his property, can he kind of set up like a travel corridor to try to get him off of, just to help him out getting through there, and maybe have him use it a little more?
Yeah, one thing I do on smaller properties is introducing food plot trails. I don't do that on larger properties, but that's an option for people depending on how much available sun you get. So, that could kind of curtail that, and that would define how, deer go from point A to point B. Increasing the interest level and attacking it adjacent to that particular trail, that's an option sometimes for clients. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but if you can't do timber work in a property like that, you're subject to whatever is resident that is going to hold their interest. You're talking about a creek through the center, which normally has higher fertility. It's going to have higher diversity. It's likely going to have lower composition or lower height structure. Its usage is going to vary throughout the year. Wind flows in those areas differently. You have to consider, the wind aspect of that. Wind generally flows at the pattern of the flow of water per se. Not always the case, but a lot of times that is the case. I've done some podcasts on wind. You can listen to that stuff, but it gets complicated. One thing I want to tell. This is a great idea. We're just talking about wind. Anybody who's walking your property, save a boatload of milkweed. Save a ton of milkweed, stuff in your pockets, and always throw it on your property. See how wind travels through your property. That's really good. A really good. I do it on clients' properties sometimes, and I do it when they're not around, so they don't think I'm a weirdo. We'll finish with a client. We rewalk their property, and I'll be throwing milkweed just to get, do I know what's going on here? And that's really good from just a simple, you can gauge it. And in the wintertime, use the snow. Watch how the snow travels through these properties. It's going to be similar to what you're going to experience in November. Free information. It's in the air. I love that kind of stuff. So that may dictate on how you hunt a property like that and how air flows through that density of cover. That will dictate a lot of times how you hunt it.
Yeah.
Access is one thing, but that's another aspect of it.
Yeah. And I think, I believe Don is right down in the same general area that we are. And it's a freaking nightmare with the wind in that area, because the only wind that you can get, especially in the Finger Lakes, you have a lot of north-south hills and ridges. And a lot of the wind, the only time you're going to get anything that's fairly consistent is a straight north or a straight south. It can vary a little bit. But once we started understanding wind a little more and how that works, it really changed my outlook on our property. And there's days I just, up at our camp, I just won't hunt there, because it's like, you can't, like, these areas where we know the deer are, your wind is going to be so unpredictable, or it's just going to be blowing or spinning up into the areas where they are. You're wasting your time. So go hunt somewhere else, find another opportunity somewhere. But, the wind is a huge point. Wind has changed everything for me. Going out and hunting in the Rocky Mountains was the big eye opener for me, because everything is about wind out there. And coming home and hunting the Finger Lakes, it'll just change your perspective on things, thinking about wind, because the deer might be there and you just might not know it. And your wind could be screwing you before you ever have that chance of seeing that deer. So,
yeah, and it's so much more complicated than I think that people even recognize. You're looking at, sometimes you can look at saturation levels of soil as being a predictor of how wind travels through certain areas, the heating and cooling aspect of it, the type of composition, the way that composition transpirates or evaporates air. There's a whole host of different factors that go in the wind. And I don't really try to get into that too much with a lot of people, because, that to me becomes overly complicated to even explain to somebody. You got to have, some mechanical background almost to understand, kind of the dynamics of that. And it's, like, so that's why I said, use some type of instrument to help you recognize how wind travels. I mean, we all need that. We can't visually, understand everything. That helps amplify that particular situation. So certainly do that. And you can't wear a bubble. You can't be a boy in the bubble in the woods, right? You can't. Well, I got this Bill Winke suit from like early 2000s. It's like this trash bag that, like, if I'm going in deep, I'm putting the Winke suit on. It zips up. It's like a trash bag. I get a kick out of some of this stuff, but I bought one. I save it for those opportune times where I gotta get dirty, right?
When you're gonna go hunt the big donger food plot, is that when you would wear something like that?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah,
next
gotta
question. Stop talking, John. Come on. Jesus.
Sorry.
You're fine. Big Willie, he asked, and he brought this up to me today. And I know Dallas is using an app, using a free version, a trial, but any certain app that you guys recommend for identifying, we're throwing names of plants out. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I just regurgitate what I hear other people saying. What apps are you guys using to identify plant species and trees when you're in the woods?
iNaturalist is one, and then Plant Snap is one, and
Plant Snap, yeah, is definitely a number one for me.
This is a great book. I don't know if you can see this. Weeds of the Northeast. That's a
Yeah,
great
I did the same thing. I went to my bookshelf.
Oh,
That's-
okay.
I can't read. So are there pictures in there or what do you
There's
got?
pictures. This one's pictures. You can get you can get this right on nda.com. You can get this over on Craig Harper's extension. This is Craig Harper's book. You probably could get a link for it for the description. This is a must. This is every client I go to. I have a recommendations for literature or whatever you want to call it when I talk to them, and this is usually the first one on that list. Great plant profile species. Told you got pictures and everything. This is, chemical mixes, different applications for different habitats. Actually just bought his new book on managing northeastern woodlots. So, and I got a whole bookshelf full of them, but that's a great one. I got one that's a lot more beat up that goes out in the field with me. That's my office copy. And then plain Jane, like Trees of the Northeast is a good one to have. If you can basically, the way I tell people to look at it, you can identify the main 5 trees on your property, the main 5 shrubs on your property, and start boiling down what wildlife likes and what they don't like, you're 90% of the way there on most pieces in our region of the country. So I think that's a great place to start.
Awesome.
I use plant identify. I've had pretty good luck with that, but I would say this though, try to get in a habit. It was what I've done the last 5 years or so of just try to learn trees and shrubs and identifying them. And then everywhere you go, work on identifying those things. And if you don't know where they are, what they are, pull your phone out of your pocket and look. And it works a lot better in the summer when there's leaves on the tree or there's berries or whatever. But make it a habit of doing that wherever you go, and you get a lot better at it quickly.
That's a good point. Next question. Kat Perez asks, sandy soil food plot options. You guys have any quick hitters on that?
Sandy soils. I'm sorry, Kat, that sucks.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing. I'm going to a property pretty soon. It's in Rome, and it's all like it's literally soil or sand. It's like sand, like next to the lake sand. There's no organic matter in it whatsoever. Some of these people have really the worst luck. Alfalfa does all right in sand. I've planted that before. Winter rye, and I'm not saying a pure sand. There's got to be some composition or organic matter in it. These are areas that you don't till. You don't till these areas. Destroying an organic matter component of the soil will really set you back. It's like running a dozer across the field. So rye, some
clovers, something like that, biennial clover, like a crimson, maybe medium red, something like that mixed into a blend. Rye is kind of a catch-all for a lot of stuff for poor conditions and stuff. And like I said, and like John's talked about, it might not be planting a food plot. It might be, like he said, the last piece of the puzzle you got to put on it. So, and it might not be the lowest hole in the bucket you got to fill with it. So,
and the other thing is, you could work with your local farmers to put in some natural sources of organic matter. Organic manure is an option. Chicken litter is an option. Use those as a foundation. So think about, spreading shit on some of these fields. And that could be
it's not horse.
Or
Right.
or Zaylor. Don't let Zaylor go over there after drinking a bunch of bush and eating freaking refried beans.
Hey, I'm looking to get rid of some chicken shit if anybody needs any.
No, but horse manure is notorious for a lot of weed seed holdover and really, really prolific and tough weeds to get rid of. Just the way their digestive system is compared to like cows or chickens or something like that. They just don't have that, like the grit factor the chickens do and the birds do, and they don't have the extra digestive that the cows do and stuff. So you get a lot more weed seeds and can have some major problems with, weed seeds with, using horse manure. But yeah, introduce an organic, compound such as manure there's a reason why farmers have done it for centuries.
Great point.
I was kind of wondering on this too, because you get up, around the Adirondack ground and you don't really get the soil like you do down Western New York area, south of the Thruway. you get up there and it's just a totally different soil. I mean, you get north of Utica and there's some farmland to the east, but once you get into the big tracts of state land in the mountains, you kind of lose that soil composition. So I had kind of wondered that the other day when I was thinking about this whole thing. Is like, John, I know you get up that way some. I don't know if you see anybody working food plots up there, or if there's anything you can really do up that way, or if you kind of
Yeah, and
just,
a lot of times you're dealing with a lot of rock, big,
Yeah.
heavy boulder rock, and so you're kind of kind of working around that situation. Usually, your food plots typically isn't your focal point in those particular areas, but you need you need additional food as an interest point to draw deer. So yeah, I've seen many people work in food plots. There are pockets of good soil. Don't just assume that it's, but there's certain areas that are glady type that have, this composition of sand it's again, it's like ocean sand. And that's completely different than some of the areas that I think people have worked on. That would kind of be on the fringes of the Adirondack area. Um, I've seen that quite a bit. And then Henderson Harbor, that way I've done some work up there. There's a lot of deer in some of those areas. But I think that I have a strategy for sandy soil, but it's complicated based upon this person's circumstances, how willing and interested they are kind of going into this no-till, no-drill technique that I'm kind of doing on my own property. And a lot of people just want to rip up dirt, and that doesn't work for sandy soil. So I'd recommend against that.
Good stuff. All right, Bo Hunt has got a question: hinge cutting versus clear cutting preferences.
Depends, like the diapers. It's one of those things where, I'll walk into a piece and say, hinge cutting is warranted, and I'll walk into a different piece and be like, a clear cutter. I don't know if he's referring to like a flush cut of a stump or traditional felling method for taking down a tree, I think is what he's kind of talking about in that situation. And it all just depends. I mean, there's some species that hinge well. I've also gone to pieces where a guy tried to cut a half-acre stand of red pine, and I don't know how he didn't not kill himself in there. So,
Jesus.
because it just doesn't hinge well, a lot of those softwood species. So, species is a big one. Your goals for it is another big one. It all depends. There's so many pieces and factors to that it's just, it's really hard to just say, yes, do this, yes, do that. I think they're both very valid tools for a toolbox for anybody. So, and I know John's been doing a lot of videos on, working that kind of stuff into like the hillside aspect kind of stuff that he talks about a lot. So I think he could give a good point of view on that.
Well, I'll just give you one thing I'm thinking about today was I'm thinking about my own property. Selfishly, I'm thinking about how to enhance a bench. And one of the strategies I typically try to employ is creating these coves of back cover. And so let's say you have a significant incline, and then let's say you have a bench, so a space that deer are going to travel on. Let's just say it's 30 yards. It's pretty long. And you want to have some coving effect to that. A lot of times I'll go up into that slope and I will hinge cut trees to create structure that's going to rebloom. And that's a good way to create some back cover without creating a lot of disturbance on that bench, right? We want deer to flow through areas. So you don't necessarily want to create too much obstruction. A lot of times hinge cutting creates obstruction that's unnecessary. I like using hinge cutting to create false canopy especially in where there's bush honeysuckle or other invasives. It creates, kind of this overhead cover that we talked about earlier, and there's not a lot of sun penetrating the ground. It's not to create like a doghouse effect. It does do that, but that's not necessarily the intent. I don't want to go back there and do work. So that's one strategy that I employ. I use a lot of it for steering. A lot of guys don't do it. I don't use it for food. I rarely use it for food. I'll use it to block areas so deer can get access to them to generate food, but I don't use it for food. And that's kind of interesting. And, there's strategies to hinge cutting. You can hinge cut ironwood species right now really well. That sap layer, you get the heartwood, so that's the center, the pit the tree, and you got the sapwood that's really condensed. It does really well in cold temperatures. Um, Sugar maple, don't hinge cut it right now. It's the worst species to hinge cut right now in these cold temperatures. There's a lot of moisture and gas in the sapwood. Okay, and that just kind of detracts from that holding aspect of it. Coppice trees, cut them off. Ben brought up that point earlier. Ash, if it's alive, cut it off. Young ash, cut it off. Grows into a bush. We want to have more bushy structure on our property. We're looking for composition of trees that are from the point of your ankles, up towards your head height. And so recreating that across your landscape will give you a lot of benefit. And naturally, it can be a food source where we talked about that kind of mineral stump aspect of it. So coppice trees, or cut them off, they'll resprout. I do a lot of willow plantings. That's coppice all those, right? Replant them. Yeah, you can grow a property in willows. Who would have thought you would create a forest full of willows? That works really well in flat ground and high moisture ground. There's some species you don't want to hinge cut. So I'm not going to give recommendations at this point, but be careful. Don't hinge cut leaning trees. That's one basic principle. Do not do that. And watch above you. Those grapevines, they tie trees up. You're going to spend more time hinge cutting trees than your regular felling trees. Hinge cutting takes way longer. So do you want to spend more time hinge cutting trees, trying to get them to stay? Or do you want to just get trees on the ground? And time is an aspect of it as well. So, not everything needs to be hinge cut. Look at the time aspect of it.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, very good point with looking up. That'll keep you a lot safer coming out of the woods, 100% with that. Look up, take your time, wear your chaps. Everybody thinks they're a big bad chainsaw guy here holding my beer, but it really boils down to you got to come back to enjoy the work that you're doing. So yeah, definitely look up. That's a great point on it. And I see guys online, hinge cutting stuff that's bigger around as your waist. Usually I'm not hinging stuff that's much bigger than maybe my leg at absolute most in a lot of situations. I just see guys trying to go crazy. I've seen some really funky stuff done on client pieces that they've tried to stuff. And like I said, I don't know how some of them have walked away from those situations, literally. So yeah, just be safe and be smart, guys. You're not impressing anybody being a chainsaw hero out there. You're really not.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had this happen firsthand. I was using an old Echo chainsaw. Safety brake was not good. And luckily I had a helmet on because the brake didn't stop the saw, and I blew the helmet right off my head and threw the shield off. So the shit's no joke. Make sure you're wearing some safety equipment and run something newer that's got a good safety brake on it, because that could have been real bad.
Yeah. And there's some great videos on YouTube. I mean, just search, how to fell a tree, chainsaw safety. Every year this time, Dallas knows that first couple of years I went out with those guys and I was all excited. I had a new chainsaw and I was doing some real stupid stuff. And because Dad never let me operate the chainsaw. He always said, "Hey, Bill, go pick up that wood and put it in a pile." So
that's because you're always shopping with Mom.
Hey, shut up, Jim. These are new people listening to the podcast and they don't know about my past. Okay, shut up. But yeah, good stuff there. So we got a couple questions from Charles Hendry. First question is switchgrass related. So how long do you guys typically see it take to get switchgrass to take and get going? Is it a 1 year thing, or is it a multiple year deal to really get switchgrass established?
It depends on your preparation. I put together a packet for all my clients on how to prepare switchgrass, because usually I'm recommending switchgrass in some areas. 3 years, you can get, 5-6 feet out of it. I've seen that. I've seen about chest height year 2. I think on my particular property, just as an example, it got about 18 inches, almost 2 feet in a couple locations, kind of spotty, and that's okay. I have a little bit different technique of establishing switchgrass, but I will say, it takes, generally 3 years. I always try to complement switchgrass with something else. I like monocultures of switchgrass for buffer zones, not bedding areas, buffer zones. So the strategies are different for everybody. And so I just kind of wanted to, switchgrass isn't always a bedding aspect. It's got no food benefit to deer, which can be a good thing, right? That can be a great thing for your property. So,
And for me, I'm brand new to the whole switchgrass craze. I guess I don't know. I wasn't one of the first people to jump on that bandwagon. I actually just got switched this year, and the reason I didn't plant last year with the switch I ordered was because what John said, I didn't have good prep. I was going to seed in the spring. I wasn't going to frost seed it because I was worried about getting one last spring in, and I'm glad I did because I didn't have a good handle on my weed control going forward with it. And everything and all the research I've done on doing switchgrass planting is that's your biggest thing. As initial competition, it will not tolerate it. So, and then the rest of it, as for your heights and stuff like that, it's going to be, soil dependent, preparation extremely dependent, good quality seed. Make sure it's something that's, from a good reputable source. Don't buy it just because it's the $5 a bag kind of variety of stuff. Usually when stuff's that cheap, it's not that good. So, yeah, like I said, I just haven't had personally a lot of experience with it. It's something I want to add to the toolbox, and that's why I spent a few $100s to play around with it on my piece this year. And it was a budgeted thing that I finally got the budget line to throw a couple $100s at switchgrass seed and got the chemicals and the sites prepped. So this year's my year to jump into the playing around with it. So.
and there's a maintenance aspect to it that everyone needs to recognize. It's not just plant and go, right? Ben said, you got to deal with the weed aspect of it, but you have to deal with, the long-term survivability of it. We can't burn it legally. So you're mowing it, and then are you raking it? What are you doing to allow that next generation of plant to, continue to grow outward and upward? So, you've got to think about that because it requires tools, right?
Yep.
Unless you're out there with a sickle.
That's a good point. Hear that, Dallas? Charles Hendry, we got another question from him. Quick answer on this. We kind of talked a little bit about it, but he's got some buckthorn in sandy soil. Should he have left that buckthorn standing, and if so, trimmed it to waist height? I think we talked a little bit about that. You guys had hit on that when we were talking earlier that, cutting some of that buckthorn, maybe not completely killing it, but cutting it off at, knee height or a little bit lower, but so that it grows up and it stays at that eye level, head level for deer to browse on. So it's a little bit of cover and browse, but not over competing everything else around it. That's kind of what I took from you guys talking earlier. Is that your thoughts on that?
I mean, you could look at replacing it with other plants and fence them and things of that nature that acclimate to sandy soils as an alternative. That would be an option. Sometimes you got to pay for fencing. And one thing you need to look at is you're going to cut a plant. What's the regeneration time of the next species that would potentially grow up in there? And again, if you're dealing with buckthorn, you may be dealing with, resident buckthorn, pioneering upwards. So, you got to think about the replacement of that. So I wouldn't necessarily cut it all. Like Ben said, Ben had, gave you the pretty good, suggestion on that. I just think if you're going to replace it, then you got to manage that next plant, right? And if it's an edible plant, and by the way, if people plant shrubs, look at the edibility or the interest point of that shrub. So, there's edible and non-edible plants. You need to kind of know what those might be if you're going to replace something. So, and look at what's native to your specific area, your ecoregion. That might dictate what you introduce. So you don't need to necessarily cut everything down because of this whole non-native craze that you hear people talk about. We also don't want an ecology based on non-native plants. That's we're the United States, not Eurasia or Europe or some other location. Uranus. Yeah.
All right, Brad, I want to move on. We got a couple more I think that we could talk about here. Brad Semino had a question. I have no clue what the hell giant miscanthus for cover versus switchgrass or anything else you can think of. So it's kind of another switchgrass question, whatever this miscanthus stuff is. I don't know what the hell that is. What is it?
Miscanthus is a rhizobius grass species that you can buy. It's typically used for screening. That's another one that's become a big buzzword, like switchgrass and hinge cutting and those kind of things. And like I said, they're all tools and they can be used in certain pieces. Miscanthus is very, very costly. You have to put in quite a bit of labor unless you're doing like a trench planting style with it. I have one client that's playing around with it. And it doesn't fit the situation. So I don't know. That wasn't a recommendation I made for him, but I told him and I'd be interested in see his results with it. But you know, I'm I'm not really for planting something that's not native as a screen in that kind of situation. Something that they say is sterilized, but again, if you ever remove soil or something from that area, that could then spread through the rhizomes. So it's a screening option. It's costly, and like I said, it's very time consuming. Um, but I haven't had any experience with it either, other than by one client that planted it this past fall. I think he got his rhizomes in the ground. If I want to say late summer, early fall. Um, so for cover aspect, I wouldn't say it's a base form of cover necessarily. I would say it's more of a screening, as is switchgrass. There's not a whole lot of cover, quote, cover value to those because there's no food aspect really to it as well. So that's kind of my opinion on it. If you're gonna have it, you might as well use it for a screening and use it for that side of a tool rather than relying on that to be your cover when it doesn't have any food component to it.
Yeah, I'll just add to it. I mean, it does really well. I mean, I've planted it I've got a bunch of it. It's a variation of what you see through real world, but it does really well in snow loads and it expands in rings, right? So you got to think about how it grows over time. Um, I've seen it used in bedding. I've seen it used in screening. I see the benefits in either one of those examples. Um, there is a consultant that uses it very regularly, and it works very well based on his recommendations of its location. It is expensive. I think it's a dollar a plant basically. Your spacing and their strategy is a little bit different than what I would recommend. I could say it's complementary, although it's cheaper. Like I'm planting evergreens this year, 7-8 footers, and those are, I don't want to even say what they are, but they're not cheap and they're not giving them away, right? So, it's a lot cheaper option that does do very well from a transparency standpoint if you plan them right. You've got to look at the transparency aspect of anything that you plant because we talked about the buffering, uh, considerations here, and it does really well if you set it up right. I wouldn't be completely in fear of using it at this point based on my experience, but it can be displaced, and that is a huge risk to anything. And I'm not trying to introduce non-native plants, in large abundance. But I am using it. And by the way, you can pot it. You can pot it and keep it in a pot and move it around and use it as screen. I mean, there's some options that you can do, and you can see how it grows. Put it in your yard first and play with it before you introduce it to property. It's a good ornamental for your yard, really.
Nice. All right, I think this will be our last question from the live end of things. Got a call or a message in here from Tim Fritz. He's got 73 acres down in Birdsall, which is down south of us here in Wyoming County. He's got some flat, wet areas, scrub and hardwoods, different elevations. So he's got some variation there. No real heavy cover though, and the neighboring property seems to have a lot of the bedding, and it seems like his property is mostly transition. No real consistent trails. Also participating in 480A. I'm assuming that's some sort of a government program. Any thoughts? I think we've talked about this. Don is dealing with this a little bit on his property. I think this is something that we deal with on our property right now. The farm that we were looking at is that the deer are traveling through, but they're not staying all that often. So it's a common thing. So you guys have any thoughts there, or have you hunted in situations like this, and how are you approaching that come deer season? Are you trying to change your property, or are you trying to just understand how your property hunts and hunt it when it's most appropriate?
I think the biggest thing I see working with clients is is access, and people kind of taking access for granted. I talk about it all the time with that's the first, that's the first thing we talked about when we started looking at the piece of property that you sent us the pictures for is access with it. And I think a lot of people aren't realizing how much they could be shooting themselves in the foot, so to speak, when not addressing the access first. As for the good bedding of pines, I would say in the wintertime, yes, but if it's a planted pine stand, and it's something that got planted in the 60s or 70s, those trees are 40, 50, 60, whatever feet tall at this point. I don't see a bedding component to that really. And if they're bedding in that, they should be bedding in some much better cover. And I think that they're being pushed to that because of poor access or heavier pressure from other neighboring pieces. If there's no food value there, there's really no value for them being in a pine stand other than for thermal protection, and stuff like that, unless they're physically pushed into those areas. So I think that's a big thing, could be the first step to look at for them is the access, and then kind of figuring out where to start, picking it apart from there. But it's should be the first thing you look at is the access. So when being going just for the bedding in the pines is kind of a big red flag that something's not right in that situation. And it's a real common thing. It's not just that property. It's a very common thing across the state. People don't relate to how smart or how good deer are at surviving, and they hunt and pattern us way efficient, most of the time with stuff. So that's kind of my initial take on that. I mean, it's really hard. We get those, I call them elevator pitches, from people all the time in these Q&As. This is my property. I'll give you 4 bullet points, break it down. Tell me the magic bullet. And that's where I'd start is access, and then start fleshing it out from there.
Yeah, I gotta say with the pines, when I was, first starting out hunting with guns, still hunting, I'd always get excited when I saw a patch of pines, and we got a few big stands around us, and I would always go sneaking up to them and, just tiptoeing into the pines thinking you're going to find all these deer laying there. And I never did. You'd normally find some deer along the edges of them, kind of on that transition line where there's some thick stuff. But as far as being in the pines, just laying there, I never really came across that myself. So I think with what he's asking, I think, with 73 acres, that's a pretty good chunk. If you could start doing some TSI in there and start thickening it up and giving them some browse, I think that would help immensely.
Yeah, the fact that you're in a 40A program, I've dealt with clients with that situation. There's limitations. You almost have to work with your resident forester to, have opportunities to do TSI. There are a few new programs that are coming out through NRCS, and I'm not that familiar with those at this point, but that type of manipulation, you're a bit controlled on what you can actually do. So you work with your resident forester, number one. That's one recommendation I would suggest. And I've worked with foresters, cutting outside of the bee line, their preferred stocking selection rates that they have, and they've worked with me on 488 programs. So it's possible to do some of this type of manipulation on a client property, but you got to have a good relationship with your forester, and certainly don't want to violate your contract. That could be problematic. So just consider that before you do anything drastic. And you can always elect to get out of those. And frankly, a lot of clients do after I'm done because it doesn't meet their goals or it doesn't fit the plan. So consider that as well.
Good answer there. And that was something that Mike Edwards hit on quite a bit, was, getting involved with your local forester for your county. They're free. They're there at your disposal. So definitely use them. And I know that's something that Dallas's dad has done on our property. And interesting how a lot of the things have come around. The stuff that the forester said is things that, we're kind of coming to the realization of, where we called the BS card. Being young bucks, thought we knew everything, but a lot of the stuff he was saying was spot on. So
Yeah, use foresters as visionists. That's the way I look at them. Most of them aren't, doing the land management stuff like we're doing. It's definitely a different face. And, obviously we're designing hunting properties that doesn't necessarily align with the silviculture mentality. I've read a few books on it, and I feel like I'm dangerous enough to mark trees, but I wouldn't recommend that you don't leverage one for purposes of maintaining kind of a long vision forestry management plan to get productive trees for money in your pocket at some point. I also don't like, I want to throw this out there, I also don't like and agree with some of their strategies. So I think as a landowner, you really need to think about your goals and interest level in this deer hunting thing, and how much time and effort you're willing to put into it, because there could be detracting points of view from a forester that do not meet your goals. And I don't mean to be controversial, because not all foresters are bad. I'm not saying they are. Not all land consultants like us are, the greatest guys or the worst guys. I mean, but, pick and choose and try to define what your goals are and make them respond and, get some commonality with meeting those goals of the forester, because they can certainly help you. And, there's some tax savings working with a forester through those plans, and you need to consider that. Again, taxes are high here. We're not hunting for free. Everything costs money. So.
Good stuff there.
Yeah, I would say I
Oh,
just one
go
little
ahead.
snippet to add on that. If you're working with a consultant, whether it's me, John, a forester consultant, anything like that, is just be flat out, be straight up honest. Whatever your goals are, whatever your budget line might be, something like that, you just got to be upfront. I mean, somebody can tell you, like a forester will tell you what your stocking guide should be, how you should cut that woods. You should put, kill all the invasives first, do whatever steps you need to. But that might not be something that's realistic for your budget line, or something that would fit with you with a 480A or some kind of program like that down the road that there are. So it just, have that good open line of communication with whoever you're working with on the consulting side or whatnot. And then it'll help you and save you a ton of headache in the long run with it.
It's good stuff. Good feedback, boys. We're reaching almost 2 hours here, and it's 10:30. In consciousness of everyone's time, probably be best to wrap this up. But we did not get to all the questions that we had originally. So first off, I apologize to everybody who put in questions that we did not get to. That just means we'll have to do this again. And maybe we'll, whether we do it live or if we do it, we could just do it off the live side of things some night, and we could put it out as another podcast. But this has been awesome, and I couldn't be more appreciative of everybody who's tuned in. I have no clue how many people were, but I know we at least had 6 or 8 people, because we got some questions. But this is good stuff, and this is what I know. The 6 of us here, and what we're all about at Pertnear Outdoors, and Ben and John, we're all local New York State Northeast guys that we want to see people around us have success and find success and be happy with what they go into the outdoors with, and just living this lifestyle. So I think we're all aligned pretty well. I've hit it off with both of you guys, John and Ben, and appreciate you guys supporting us here and doing that. The question and answer and spending your Thursday evening with us. So I guess if each one of you guys kind of in closing, kind of plug yourselves again, where people can find you. So John,
Yeah, I'll
start
go.
with you.
Yeah, I'll go real quick. You know what? My parting words are pretty simple, right? This is, a lot of people trying to make this a lot more complicated is, and even tonight, I hope it didn't come off that way. It's really not that complicated. Ben talked about access. I talked about wind. We talked about dealing with invasive plants. We're dealing with sun and soil. That's it. Sun and soil. That's it. From the habitat side of things. And it's managing both of those. You can improve and manipulate both those and how they penetrate and access and all the things that we talked about tonight. Don't think this is too complicated. You start clicking into these YouTube channels and you get sucked into these guys that start telling you the 5 best things or 10 best things. Look at your property and let's work for you. Work with your neighbors. Start to build your community. You have resources like myself, Ben. There's other people that do this. It's good to stay local. We know the culture, we know the hunting communities, we know the variation across the landscape. It's different. That's why I started this business, to educate people and to be a resource for people. And, I appreciate having an opportunity to be a part of this. It's nice working with Ben. And there's a lot of good people that do this. I'm an honest broker, and I think a lot of people, doing it for the right thing. I'm trying to do it for the right thing. I want to see everybody improve their deer hunting. My goal out of this is to not just, learn, it's to educate, but it's also to have people reach a potential goal that might be beyond even what I'm able to reach. And I've been doing this, right? I know generally what to do in most situations. I want to see other reach success levels above me. I've got 50 acres. I passed up 150-inch deer this year on 50 acres. Nobody manages deer around me. I'm not in the best hunting area. I think that just goes to show you that there's opportunities. People can tap into resource, work with your neighbors. And I'm not trying to brag about anything I'm doing. I'm a humble guy. I'm lucky to be able to afford 50 acres. People have a lot more than I do, and I'm envious of that at times, but I also want to help people. So, that's just kind of a plug there. And I think we're all have a common interest, and that's to improve our deer hunting. And, a lot of us are conservationists. I would say, echo that, focus on planting, native plants, focus on biodiversity. It's not just about deer. There's other species we need to care about: grouse, bees, butterflies, everything. And you can work to improve all those aspects and enjoy your property, 365 days a year. So that's what my business is. You can find me, Whitetail Landscapes. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. You can get a hold of me. I'm booked out through this year, but I do have spots available in 2022. So you can get a hold of me next year. And, I'm looking forward to helping people, and hopefully I get to work on a project with Ben sometime. And, I may have a habitat day up on my property. I'd invite people to come. I'm still trying to figure that out with the COVID situation. It'll be nominal fee, but you'll learn a lot, and you'll get to hear me talk the whole day, which, might be fun. I don't know. All right. That's it for me, but get a hold of me at Whitetail Landscapes, and that's it.
Thanks, John.
Yeah, so I guess for closing remarks, I want to thank you guys for putting this all together, John, for letting us go back and forth on stuff. And that's the thing with everything, is no matter who you work with, a consultant, or even if you're bouncing ideas off a friend, family member, something like that, people are going to have different points of view and stuff like that. And it might help you better break down the situation. And I would say, don't get discouraged. Like John says, just focus on the basics. Really don't try to overcomplicate it and try to hit the next fad or hit the next cool thing that seems to come out, whatever it might be. Really figure out what works for your piece and take it right back. Like I said, the biggest thing I change people's hunting is through the access alone. Whether that's accessing along a border and blowing your stuff onto a neighbor's, or maybe it's coming up a ravine cut and utilizing the topography to your advantage and your access. That and I get it, it's not a 100-yard walk to your stand. I just took that 100-yard walk and I made it a 300-yard walk. But if your property hunts a lot better, it's worth that extra couple 100 yards. So I would say that in closing. I do have Facebook. I'm not doing as much on Facebook anymore. I do a little bit on Instagram, and most of my stuff, my content, it's kind of on my YouTube channel. I don't do any edits, nothing like that. I'm just a one take and done. I don't put nothing else into it. I just give you straight content. I don't give you, like John said, I don't give you the top 5, top 10 things you should be doing. I'm doing an apple tree pruning today, guys. This is me pruning an apple tree for 10 minutes, going right through it, and explaining what I'm doing. I got plant identification videos on there and stuff I've done in the past. I did a land management A to Z series on there too. So find that on YouTube. That's Ol'Tin Cup. And then if anybody's interested in buying, selling land in New York, I got to go sign a new listing in Oneida County. So kind of out John's way. So I might try to touch base with him when I'm out there taking pictures of that listing and stuff. And, be happy to help anybody in the buying or selling process of a piece of land. I get a question all the time about leases. We don't really handle leases. That's more something word of mouth. Doesn't really happen too much on the land side of stuff for leasing, for working with an agent. But I want to thank you guys again for all the support and letting me and John, blow some air around tonight, I guess, with all you guys. It was a good time for sure. And I look forward to the questions next time around.
Yeah, man, that's what this is all about. It's helping each other and everybody build a community and resources. You know, you guys are endless amounts of information that we possibly can't. I sell things for a living. I don't understand how to do things, so I need people like you in my life. Dallas, Jimmy, Danny boy, you guys got anything in closing?
Yeah, I just two things real quick. One thing is a reminder, you know, all this stuff we're talking about with improving your land and coming up with a plan. This isn't stuff that you can't make all this happen in 1 year. I mean, if you look at our property, it's probably going on 10 plus years where we've been really working a plan and tying different pockets together. And we're really just starting to see the payoff of it now. And the second thing is just thanking Ben and Jon for all their help. It's been great getting to know you guys. Jon, I ran some stuff by you last year. I said, you know, this is what I got working. I got like a week to get it in. What can I do? And you threw me some ideas for the food plot and stuff that I've never done before, as far as, you know, we always fertilize, lime, do all this stuff. And I was like, I don't have time for all this shit. Don't want to spend the money on it. It never works. I'm like, just what can I do? And you said, do this, this, and this. And that was our best food plot this year. And I shot one of my biggest archery bucks off it this year. So, well, I didn't shoot it off it, but it was, you know, I was sitting right over the top of it because that's where everything was happening. So
You should have lied and said off it, man. Stick
Yeah.
with that story.
well, it died in it. Does that count?
Yeah.
So no, I mean,
Yeah,
it's
you
just
harpooned it. I got it.
yeah, it's just a testament to, you know, the knowledge you guys got. I mean, it took something that I was trying to make complicated and you made it simple. And just for people out there, you know, don't be afraid to shoot these guys a message. If you're sitting there wondering what you're supposed to be doing this way or that way, just bounce it off them. They'll answer your questions and put you on the right path. And I appreciate it. So thank you guys very much.
Uncle Dallas.
Yeah, I just was going to say I enjoy this conversation. I think a lot of other people do too. I mean, we had quite a bit of interaction here. There was a lot of good questions. And, you know, as you said, there was all the questions that were submitted ahead of time we didn't even get to. So I'm sure, you know, if Jon and Ben are willing to spend a little more time on this stuff, do another podcast or whatever, it's, I think this is one of the most interesting things you can talk about in the off season is all this habitat stuff. So appreciate it. Thanks, Jon. Thanks, Ben.
No, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not in a spot yet where I have property to manage, but I obviously am striving to that at some point in time, hopefully. And this was very informative from just my standpoint of not even owning or managing anything. So just good info all around from my standpoint. So thanks, guys.
You own chickens, don't you?
I do.
When are you going to start the chicken shit business?
Yeah. There's a lot of people in your area that need chicken shit manure, Danny boy.
I got to find some people with sandy soil. Offer them some chicken shit till that stuff in.
I go up north a lot. I mean, we can set, you know,
we can work something out.
Fee and yeah, I mean, we'll get it up there.
Yep.
I think that's a great place to end this discussion. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed the discussion and keep your eyes peeled in the next couple of days for the Shed Fest, which will be launching here. We're excited about that. And make sure to check us out at pertnearoutdoors.com. So thank you, everybody. Sleep tight, kids, and wash your hands. Feed them.
Keep feeding them.
See ya.